So you may have felt it before when your parents are giving you the silent treatment or they storm off after an argument, or you feel like you're the one who has to be more mature and handle things better when it comes to apologies. Your parents raised you, but that doesn't mean that they're more mature than you. Sometimes, and from what I see in my work, especially as children of immigrants, your parents may be emotionally younger than you. In fact, they may be emotionally immature. And sometimes they just have a completely different emotional framework. And I want to talk about all of this. How can you know when your parents are acting emotionally younger than you? How can you know when they are, in fact, emotionally immature? And at what point do we say they actually are just operating with a different emotional skill set? And what do you do once you can identify their own emotional framework? How does it affect you? And what can you do to move forward? Let's dive into all of this. As a child of immigrants, me included, we are often raised in a dominant society in the West where emotional fluency is emphasized. We learn to be emotionally open. We learn about vulnerability. We learn therapy speak about boundaries and gaslighting and toxicity and narcissism. We become emotionally articulate. And the truth is, we have access to these resources, to this knowledge, to therapy, to healing, to growth in ways that our parents and our ancestors never did. Not to mention, in the dominant society, we are being raised in a culture that emphasizes individualism, emphasizes personal healing and growth. In contrast, many of our immigrant parents were raised in completely different cultural systems that operated with completely different emotional playbooks. Their emotional skill set may look like emotional control under pressure, self-sacrifice and resilience, nonverbal and practical forms of communication to communicate love and care, and community and group and family were prioritized over the sense of self. So, knowing all of this, let's ask the big question. Are your parents actually emotionally younger than you? When I posted about this topic on Instagram, it blew up. Over 200,000 children of immigrants were engaging with the content.
It's either I don't have a relationship with them or I have one where I can accept them for the emotional age they are, which is probably a lot younger than me. And I don't say that in a mean way. I say that in a they were living in survival mode. It allows me to have a level of compassion that allows me to show up a little differently.
And asking really hard questions and reflecting on really big themes. Were their parents emotionally immature? Why did their parents feel like they had been stunted in some way when it came to their emotional growth? And how did it affect them? And what do they do with that now that they know that? Many of you related to this, and many of you were asking yourselves, wait, are my parents emotionally immature? What am I supposed to do with that? So what are some signs of emotional immaturity? These are things like sulking, giving you the silent treatment, lashing out and being angry impulsively. They can also be guilt tripping, something that I hear a lot in the community, shaming you instead of taking accountability and deflecting any responsibility onto someone else. Another sign of immaturity can be relying on you to fulfill their emotional needs, to help them be comfortable, to help them make decisions, to help them feel calm and peaceful. For example, let's imagine that you are supposed to be going home next weekend and you realize that you have a really big work or school deadline coming up. So you know what? It's actually better if you don't go home. So you call your mom and you say, hey mom, I actually have this really big work deadline. I'm not going to be able to come home next weekend. I'm actually going to come home the weekend after, or I'm going to come home a month later. I hope that's okay. Instead of saying something like, okay, good luck, I'm wishing you the best, your parent might respond with, oh, okay, you're not going to come home. You don't love us anymore. You don't visit your family anymore. I guess we're just going to sit here by ourselves. I know that this is a common experience because I hear it all the time. And I just want to say that that's not an adult to adult response. That's a guilt trip, and it puts the burden back on you to make up for how your parent is feeling. It's not a collaborative conversation. And that's what I mean by emotionally younger. Even though your parents might be in their 50s, their 60s, their 70s, they're acting like a hurt teenager. They are acting like someone who is emotionally a lot younger than what their actual age is. And this can be really common because our parents have often survived through war, right? They have lived through trauma, abuse, poverty, colonization, genocide, immigration, maybe once, twice, 3 times over. I understand that when they are in survival mode, when a person is in survival mode, they are not self-actualizing and accessing their emotional depth, because what is more important is safety, security, survival. And I have empathy for that, and I have a lot of compassion for our parents. And in some ways, that can lead to arrested development emotionally for some of our parents, because they are stuck in an age in which they were able to maybe get some of those emotional needs met before they became in survival mode, or they just haven't learned how to come out of survival mode. But let's look at it from the other side. How do you know if your parent is being emotionally immature, or if they are just emotionally different than you. Some of the signs that your parent may just contextually be emotionally different than you are they avoid direct confrontation because harmony is prioritized for them. Or they may show care through actions instead of words. They might cook for you. They might do things for you. They might incessantly ask you about your safety and comfort, but they're not actually telling you, hey, I love you. Hey, I'm proud of you. They may even have learned and encourage you to see emotional maturity as silence, as emotional restriction, instead of speaking out, being assertive, and being vulnerable. One common example of this is I hear how so many immigrant moms cut fruit as a way to say, I love you. And I think this is such a practical, sweet form of care. My own mom does this too. But growing up, I have so many memories of asking my mom, do you love me? Even now, sometimes I'll go home and I'll say, Mom, can you just say the words, I love you? I just want to hear it. I used to feel like she didn't or she couldn't. And by not saying those words, it made me feel like I wasn't getting some of my emotional needs met growing up. Now I can understand that my mom is speaking a different emotional language. Hers is not verbal, it's nonverbal, it's indirect. It's staying at the tip of the driveway and waving to me while I leave after a visit home. It's cutting me fruit. It's doing my laundry when I come home. It's buying all of my favorite snacks. It's making sure that I have everything that I need. Those are the ways that she says I love you, not saying I love you. Another example I hear a lot in the community is having a parent where you might have had an argument and they never apologize. I hear stories from so many of you who say, well, my dad and I just got into a fight, and the next day we acted like nothing happened. And I might push a little bit and say, did his behavior change? Did anything change? He might not have apologized. He might not be bringing up the conflict, but did he do anything that might be a little different from how he was acting the day before? Sometimes it's uncovered that he left out a newspaper clipping of, a topic that you really like, or he had cut some fruit for you, or he had given you some money. And these can feel like really non loving ways to say, I'm sorry. But instead of having the language to say, I'm sorry, it's his way of apologizing without actually saying the words, I'm sorry. Sometimes I even see in my own parents that they won't say, I'm sorry, but the next time I'm home, they don't do the same thing that they did when we got into a fight last time. They actually have changed and amended their behavior without us acknowledging the fact that they're trying to be better. That is their way of apologizing without actually saying the words. That's when I think sometimes it's a completely different emotional framework, not necessarily them being immature. In their cultural playbook and their cultural framework, showing action and doing something is how they repair rupture rather than having the conversation about the issue at hand. I'll never forget that my dad, for my whole life has always told me actions speak louder than words. And this is where sometimes we have butt heads because I feel like as a bicultural person who has grown up in the West, who has access to the dominant society's way of expression, vulnerability, communication. As a therapist, I understand the power of verbal repair and verbal conversation. And I know now that that is my way of existing as someone who is bicultural. My dad is operating from a more monocultural playbook where he genuinely believes that action is how you repair, action is how you show love. And if I can switch the way I think about it and think about it from that framework, I can see all the ways that he is showing his love, even if he's not saying it. That one switch in my head is such an aha moment to help me, and I hope to help many of you realize that if we are going to receive our parents' actions and words, we have to receive them from their playbook and their framework rather than our own. That is how we create that bridge in the middle between us. So, talking about all of this, I guess I want you to reflect a little bit. Do you feel like your parents are emotionally younger than you, or do you feel like they are just emotionally different? Now, I want to be very honest and say that for many of our parents, it might actually just be both. They might be emotionally younger, emotionally more immature, and they may be operating from a different emotional cultural playbook. Many of our parents weren't modeled openness, and they are still operating emotionally from a place of survival and scarcity. Those kind of experiences I talked about that our parents have gone through can lead to a freeze response when it comes to emotional development. So your parent who has never learned to self-soothe may learn to yell to get what they need. And for you, as someone who might have grown up in a different scenario, not in survival mode, someone who had access to more emotional resources, you might feel like your parents are stuck behind you. Sometimes it's clear, like a guilt trip. that it is immaturity at play. And sometimes it's not so clear. Naming both of these truths can help us acknowledge that maybe they are doing the best they can, and it can still hurt us. For example, I hear from many of you who say that your parents often give the silent treatment. I'm particularly reminded of a story that I heard when recording my podcast by someone who said, my mom just didn't talk to me for like a week after we got into conflict.
I tried expressing to my mother something that didn't sit well with me, that I was having some negative feelings about. I told her I'd been feeling angry about it and that I just wanted to have a conversation and dialogue so I could hear where she was coming from and also just share what I was feeling. And she immediately broke down and started crying to the point where I didn't even get to bring up what I was wanting to talk about. About one or two sentences in, I stopped because I could tell that her sense of self was collapsing under the brief feedback that I gave. And she was so distraught just from me even bringing something up that she actually didn't talk to me for 3 months after that, avoiding my calls, making no contact with me. And then when she did eventually start talking to me, it was during a trip when I was visiting, and she just acted like nothing happened.
And that is such a painful experience. The silent treatment can be so harmful to the ways that we feel about ourselves and to the relationship and the safety we feel in the relationship. And I can also acknowledge that maybe that mom was operating from a playbook where she learned from a young age that being silent and not speaking up was a way to actually de-escalate conflict, that being silent is a way to remove yourself from the conflict. That might be rooted in some level of survival, either because of the family dynamics, abuse, gender expectations, whatever it is. And just because she's operating from a different playbook does not mean that that is not harmful to you as the child, that it can feel punishing to you and it can lead to self-criticism and diminishing of your self-worth. So both of these things can be true at the same time. Another example of your parent being both emotionally younger than you and also operating from a different playbook is I hear from so many people in the immigrant community and adult children of immigrants who specifically say, every conversation with my parent is about my career, is about money, is about work, is about success, is about productivity, is about achievement. And I just wish they could just say, I'm proud of what you've done. I'm proud of what you're doing. I'm proud of how far you've made it. I'm proud of what you've achieved. And that can feel so frustrating as a kid not to hear those words from our parents. It's easy to feel like our parents don't know how to connect with us on a deeper level. But for parents who grew up in places of neglect, survival, parents who immigrated and needed to work their butts off to create a sense of safety and stability and belonging in this new country, it makes sense that they are operating from a framework of saying, hey, the only way I know that you're going to be okay and I love you and I want you to be okay is if you focus on your academics, your work, and your achievements. And so again, that switch is really helpful and it doesn't change the fact that it can be really hurtful to you. Now, I want to be very clear that regardless of if your parents are emotionally younger than you, if they are immature in some ways, if they have a level of emotional arrested development, or if they are just operating from a different emotional playbook, this can still impact you. And it can still lead you to feel like you have outgrown in some ways their way of showing love and their emotional depth. And that can be a particularly precisely painful experience. We don't talk enough about how painful that can be to feel like you can understand their side, you can understand where they're coming from, and you can desperately and very greedily want more from them because that's what you need as their kid. And I want to take a minute to acknowledge that because I know that and I work with a lot of clients who struggle with that. So we've talked a little bit about all of the ways our parents can be emotionally younger than us. They can be operating from emotionally different playbooks. But where does that leave us as their kids? How does that actually impact you? If your parent is emotionally younger than you, then you were likely parentified as a kid, someone who took on adult-like roles to be the confidant for one of your parents or both your parents, the family mediator, someone who held a lot of the emotional burden in the family. There might be role reversal where you act as more of a parent now than your parent does to you. You might feel guilt and resentment, and you might struggle with setting boundaries or asserting yourself because it leads to manipulation, guilt trips, tantrums from your parents. If your parents are operating from a different emotional playbook. It can lead you to have mismatched expectations. You want verbal validation? They do acts of service. It doesn't always feel so aligned. It can also lead to miscommunication. You might see withdrawal as rejection and they might see it as maturity, de-escalation, protection. And at the end of the day, you're still frustrated because it doesn't feel enough to you. So how do you move forward as a bicultural person who is operating and straddling between two different frameworks when it comes to emotional depth, emotional expression, and the ways that emotions are received, felt, and acknowledged? First and foremost, you have to name it and recognize that you are both operating from completely different frameworks. And at the end of the day, while your parent might be more bicultural depending on how long they've been in this country or in the Western society, you are often the bicultural human who is the one who is responsible for straddling and entering and moving through both of the cultural frameworks. You also want to name it accurately. Is the way that they're acting immaturity, or is it honestly just different? And how can that lead to bigger conversations you can have with them? You also want to adjust your expectations. I work with a lot of children of immigrants who just keep wanting to expect their parents to be the parent that they want. But if your parents, whether or not it's immaturity or just a different playbook, are operating in a place that isn't the same as you, then you will always feel hurt when they aren't giving you what you need. You can't expect your parent to be therapist-like if they don't believe in therapy, have a lot of stigma, don't understand therapy language. You also can't expect them to be your number one support system all the time emotionally if they don't even do that with themselves. We can only meet people as deep as they're willing to go with themselves. And if they don't do it for themselves, they don't do it for other people, it might help you take it less personally to understand that they're not going to do it with you either. Now, that doesn't mean it's not going to hurt. It doesn't feel painful. It just means that it's not a personal thing that they are doing to you as their kid. Also, managing your expectations will help you just have realistic expectations to understand how you can enjoy and be loved in the relationship, and also protecting yourself and getting your needs met somewhere else. You can hold a lot of compassion for your parents, but you can also hold compassion for yourself. You can learn to translate between these frameworks, right? You can learn how to move between them and understand where your parents are coming from and have conversations in ways that they can understand. But at the end of the day, you might need to look for chosen family or support from someone else. You might need to come to the Brown Girl Therapy community and join these groups where we can talk about what it's like to be a child of an immigrant and have needs that aren't always met in the home. And regardless of whether or not it's immaturity or just a different emotional framework, you have to give yourself permission to grieve the parents that you didn't have and the parents that you wish you had. It's not something that happens right away, but it's one of the hardest things to do. But giving yourself that permission allows you to accept what is, while also being willing to receive what you can get, but also acknowledge what you're not going to get. We explored a really tricky topic and I asked a lot of big questions, and I'm really curious to hear what you think. So please feel free to leave a comment. I want to know, what do you think about your immigrant parents being emotionally younger than you, immature, operating from a different emotional framework? I think it can be all of the above. It can be one over the other. I would really love to hear from you. So feel free to leave a comment, share with your friends, and I'll see you next time. And remember, your emotional growth, your emotional vulnerability, it deserves to exist. Wherever that is, I hope you find it.